Welcome to the First Buck Podcast, where we feature stories about entrepreneurs and the people who support them. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, and welcome to the First Buck Podcast, brought to you by sky'sthelimit.org. We feature stories about entrepreneurs and the people that support them. Today, we're joined by Fabio Rosati, a serial entrepreneur who has served as the CEO of Elance, Upwork, and chairman of Snagajob. Fabio is passionate about the opportunities in the employment and employability labor market by focusing on technology platforms that connect employers with talent. So Fabio, I'm so excited to talk with you today. You've had an extraordinary career, both in private and in public markets, working at the early stage and at the scaling stage. So we're going to learn a lot. And one of the first questions I love to ask everyone, though, is how did you earn your first buck?
Nick, I actually earned my first lira when I was in it.
Foreign currency. Okay.
The lira doesn't exist anymore. It's the euro now. But I guess I was doing manual work, deliveries, and yard work for neighbors. Classic. But my first dollar was when I was in college as a DJ. I had the opportunity to DJ at a club that had just opened in Georgetown called Cafe Med, of all things. And for a while, it was a lot of fun, but it also really interfered with my studies. So DJ was my first buck.
Got it. Okay. So from the lira to the dollar, doing manual labor to becoming a DJ. Talk to us a little bit about how that transition and your sort of aptitude with financial literacy improved and maybe talk to us a little bit about how your career got started.
Yeah. Well, first, I should mention financial literacy. As I earned my first few dollars, I was in undergraduate business school at Georgetown. I started to invest, and I had my first experience with terrible investments. I bought penny stocks because I found a newsletter that was advertising these companies with amazing growth potentials, and hey, 50 cents a share looked like a real good deal for me, and I pretty much lost all of it. So I learned not to believe the literature, and I learned to become a lot more sophisticated about understanding businesses and markets. It was my first exposure to investing. And from there, at some point, I ended up going into first a training program for financial management, and then into management consulting, which was a phenomenal school for business because you get to see lots of companies and lots of management teams across a multitude of sectors, working with great colleagues for in a highly concentrated amount of time. A lot of variety, a lot of exposure. So I think my foundation in the end was really about what I learned during those consulting years that I could then transfer to entrepreneurship.
Okay, cool. So one of the things I want to learn a little bit about, so you earned your first bucks and then lost your first bucks in a painful lesson, which I think happens to so many young people. They basically think that something sounds like an incredible opportunity, and it turns out it is too good to be true. Once you started basically bringing a little more rigor and maybe a little suspicion to those types of things, when was the first time you made an investment and you saw a return on it? And how did you go about sort of making that decision?
Well, I started to invest in the stock market, and I learned about the principles of value investing first. I remember that I started investing in the 80s. It was not a great time to invest because the market had corrected. But at the same time, valuations were low. So I really focused on value investing. I at the time I invested primarily in company stocks. It was the beginning of technology. And then a few years later, the 90s happened and the internet bubble happened. And I saw the impact of animal spirits, as I call them, which is when people start to have irrational expectations about what's possible. You go from all of the rules of value investing, they basically go in the garbage, and you try to understand what animal spirits are going to do to valuations, only to see that evaporate again, very quickly. And that cycle, I guess, because I'm old enough to have seen a few of those, taught me a lot. You should take advantage when you should track great companies and then wait for the right time to buy them. but don't, as opposed to being impulsive. Like you want to study a company for years. I have tracking stocks that I track for 2, 3, 4 years, and I track their price. And when the time is right, I feel like, okay, this company, I know it's solid. I know management. I know the strategy. I understand it. I'm familiar. And I'm going to go buy their stock now because it's dropped 40% because they missed a quarter or something like that. That strategy served me very well. Later, much later in my career, I started to make investments in early stage businesses. And I've only been doing that since 2016. I've been therefore a relatively new venture investor. And that's a whole other ballgame. We can have a whole discussion about what that's like and what I'm learning. I'm still learning. But I think I've kind of nailed a couple of my guiding principles for early stage investing.
No, that's cool. So from the time that you transitioned out of university and then went into management consulting and then kind of began your own entrepreneurial career, talk to us a little bit about how the world, in your view, as someone that's really passionate about helping especially young people find jobs and careers, how has this world changed in the last decade or two?
It's interesting. There's two dimensions. One is how it's changing substance, and then how it's changing form. I would say that in form, it's changed tremendously because it is easier than ever to apply for a job, and it's easier than ever to discover a job opening. While when decades ago, it was much harder. The research for what jobs are open and what's available, what about the company, what is the job about, what about the job description, and how do I apply? The amount of friction was massive.
Yeah.
The form has changed. In substance, you still have to lead with skills early on in your career. Hard skills get you hired, soft skills get you promoted. That old maxim still applies. And it's extremely important to recognize that very early on in your career, more than ever, your hard skills are what employers are looking for. Your soft skills are things that you bring and will help you advance in your career. But if you don't have hard skills that open that door, more than ever before, you're probably going to have a hard time landing a job. And the reason is that companies no longer invest as much as they used to in developing workers. The days of I mentioned earlier on in our conversation, I went into a financial management training program for 18 months. I was trained because the assumption was I knew absolutely nothing. And it's true, I know nothing, even though I'd studied, I had no clue. So you get trained, you learn, and you get rotated, and you have mentors. I was very lucky that I had that. It's very rare nowadays. Nowadays, you're expected to learn on your own, and you're expected to develop certifications and know-how on your own. And when people get hired, they come with the assumption that everybody's too busy and too stretched to teach you on the job. So you better figure it out. That's what's the biggest change that I've seen.
Yeah, and I think that discovery can probably feel quite overwhelming for young adults that are beginning searching for career opportunities. I think that was such a wise thing, though, is that the hard skills get you hired and the soft skills get you promoted. But it's really important to tune and cultivate those hard skills.
In fact, when people I have 4 children, and so I'm living this firsthand. But I've been focusing on this area of employment and employability for at least 2 decades. Studying a job description to understand what the employer is looking for, and then targeting your narrative and your message to exactly what they're looking for from a hard skills perspective. It's really important. What exactly is this job going to be about? The job description will tell you a lot. And in addition to your writing the right letter and networking and try to ping people on LinkedIn and do whatever you have to do to get a job and get their attention, stand out of the crowd, being in a position to, while you potentially wait to be interviewed, brush up your skills on that technology or that tool, whether it's Google Analytics, if you're in marketing, or it's some programming technology that you may need if you're applying for a technical job, whatever that is, really, really important, even if you're in an entry-level position, maybe more so.
Yeah. So one of the reasons I love asking people how they earn their first buck is partially an icebreaker, but also because almost everybody in the world starts off as an entrepreneur. They mow the lawn, they carry the groceries for grandma, they maybe set up a lemonade stand. And so, of course, you can have a very successful career working for somebody else, but actually working for yourself is a very interesting and very viable pathway for many people out there. And so what I wanted to ask you, as someone that's founded and built and scaled a bunch of companies and invested in many more, a lot of early stage entrepreneurs think they need to get a loan or funding right away to get their business started. But what advice would you give to a young person thinking about their first startup?
It's interesting. The right startup is for you personally. It's a personal choice. One of my biggest learnings is choose a business that works for you. Don't choose a business because it's in vogue. First of all, by the time you build anything meaningful at end of scale, chances are that others will have agreed with you that there is an opportunity, will have started to build other businesses that are similar, will have attracted capital potentially. So, and in some cases, what you created and started after 2 to 3 years may no longer even be relevant. So don't focus just on market opportunity and say, I don't know, artificial intelligence is hot. I'm going to go into artificial intelligence, because it could be that in 3 years something completely different is relevant and important. And technology in particular changes so fast. And instead, focus on problems that you want to solve, things that really matter to you. Assume that the most important part of entrepreneurship is not the destination, but the journey. I read a quote once about your job is do not expect to finish the job. Expect to add to a piece of it, your contribution. So do not expect to arrive at the end. When you start a company, you may not make it, but expect to be on the journey and move things along for a little while. And when you look back, if you fail, you can say, well, I tried, it was worthwhile, and the journey was really great. I enjoyed the journey. Very personal. I wish I could give you some more formulaic thing, but I would say go back to who are you? What do you care about? Do you really want to work on this? And then apply some rigor to it. But first and foremost, is this what I want to do with my time? Because you'll be spending, if you're lucky, 60 hours a week, and more likely 80 to 100 hours a week on whatever endeavor you choose. It has to be something that comes from inside you.
Yeah. I always say that no one will ever care about your idea for your business as much as you do. And so that's why it is so important that it comes from some deep reservoir of passion that you have for whatever it is, whether it's cooking or launching a fashion clothing company or a management company or a coaching company. You have to care a lot about it, because ultimately that's going to be your unfair advantage.
And the other thing I think I would mention, Nick, is we're having this conversation a minute before we started the podcast. I understand the weather changes. Like you may be sailing in very pristine, calm waters with a beautiful sunset and a light breeze and the temperature in the 70s right now. But chances are, as you continue on your journey, you're going to have hurricanes, you're going to have gruesome waters, and you're going to have people thrown overboard. I'm using analogies like that just to give a sense of what it might be like to be the captain of a ship, an entrepreneur. There are moments where you're really tested. And the sea legs you need to go through those difficult moments, you develop those sea legs only if you fundamentally have passion and you're doing things for the right reasons. Otherwise, you'll give up, you'll quit.
Another thing we talk a lot about at skyslimit.org is sort of this concept of practicing, which is how you get better at doing anything. And you talked about it in the context of rigor or discipline. And I think that's so true. Almost anyone can get better at developing almost any type of skill by going out there and practicing that. And that's why you'll hear oftentimes many entrepreneurs have struggled in many endeavors before they sort of acquire all of the accumulated experience to have a moment and break through and develop that patience, and also the sort of risk taking that's necessary sometimes to to persevere through those challenging market conditions. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because you've built some big companies that have gone public, selling a product or a service is key for any founder or business leader. Those are some of those soft skills. What was a memorable business deal, or maybe, I don't know, a fundraising that you closed or something that you could share with us today? How did you go about it? And what lessons,
I have no doubt I'm going to talk to you about landing FedEx as the first Elance customer. So Elance developed an enterprise offering, and way back when, this was the very early days. And the enterprise offering was, the idea was to help large companies hire managed contractors more effectively. And we, the team, we split the work between who's developing the product, who's going to sell it. And as a CEO, I basically had to do a little bit of everything. But my job was primarily at one point, once the product started to come together, to sell it. And we didn't have a customer. And I started spending 4 or 5 days a week on the road, trying to sell the damn thing, making presentations with PowerPoints and little demos and wire diagrams, asking our investors to help us set up meetings. And we had wonderful board members with tremendous Rolodexes. And so we would get these amazing meetings, and I would show up and everybody would say, wow, that's an amazing idea. It's an amazing product. We would love to try it. Who else is using it? And every time I would say, well, you would be the first. You don't want to be the first. Come back when you have at least 3 customers. And I basically went through 6 months of that. And then one day we landed. We landed in Memphis and had a meeting at FedEx's headquarters, the team, and I went through the same thing. At that point, we were sort of PSTD or rejection. Everything is going to go great because we've gotten really good at everything, but we're going to hear the same stuff. And instead, these guys at FedEx said, who else is using the product? And I said, well, in all truth, you would be the first. And I held my breath, and they looked at each other and says, that's great. We love being the first. And we're all like, really? Says, yes, because when we are the first, they use the term, you will tickle us pink with attention. Yeah. You will give us exactly what we want. You will listen to our input. We will develop a product that meets our needs. And that was like music to my ears. And the reason I mentioned the story is because it fundamentally reshaped my thinking. And this is advice that I give to every entrepreneur I work with. When you look at a TAM and a target market, if there are 1,000 potential customers, your job is not to sell to all 1,000 right away. If your product is new, discover which of those customers are early adopters. Don't go sell to a bank if banks are notoriously the last ones to adopt something. Go start with the early adopters. There's a few companies in the Fortune 500 who are like FedEx. They are the first. GE at the time was another example. There are some mid-sized companies that are really good at this. That's the lesson. Know your market and be skeptical. I got 1,000 potential customers. I need the 5 customers who are early adopters to get started.
This is such great advice, and something that'll be so important for small business owners and entrepreneurs to learn is that the rejection will happen a lot at first because people won't necessarily have confidence. But if you find the right potential client to talk to, then you're really in the right place. And so that's a fantastic lesson. Thank you for sharing.
And the same thing if you're opening up in a shop in your neighborhood and you're selling flowers or it's a barber shop, anything, just know who is the most likely going to try you first. That's what you want to find out.
And then you get the testimonial, and then you use that to shop and build more credibility and start to sell more. That's fantastic. So you've hired a lot of people in your career, I imagine. And I think this is one of the hardest things to do well is to surround yourself with better people to give you great advice and to build your companies. What's your favorite interview question?
I have 2, actually. The one is if you were President of the United States with full executive powers for 30 days, only 30 days, and you knew that in those 30 days you had the opportunity to have a lasting impact on our society, what would be the 1 or 2 things you would do? And then I just sit there and I listen. And I love that question because it gives people an opportunity to express what really matters to them. It gives me a chance to understand how they think, where their heart is. I get to know them outside of the world of work in many ways. So that's one of my favorites. The second favorite question is, no matter how old the person is, this works better with more senior talent, but I think it applies to all talent. I ask, I say, you at this point probably know yourself pretty well, and you recognize that your success depends both on your capabilities, but also your environment. What can you tell me about the kind of environment that allows you to thrive? What do you need? Where will you be successful? And again, I sit back and listen, and it's really, really interesting to see what people come up with and how they think. And it gives me a lot of insights on whether it would be a good fit and where their heart is and the level of passion and all that.
Thank you. I might have to borrow those. I love the present.
You can have a lot of fun with them.
Yeah. And that second one is really interesting because every company has sort of a different culture. And there are some people that, despite how successful they've been or what credentialing they have, are not going to be a good fit for your culture. And I think exploring and listening to people talk about what they need out of their environment to be successful will be hugely informative as young entrepreneurs build their companies and understand how to get a team around them that can operate with them and with the expectations they have for how the team is successful. And so
I use the example of plants in greenhouses. I say you go to a nursery to buy a plant, and the plant looks fantastic. You bring it home, and after 3 weeks, the plant is dead, and you've done everything you're supposed to. It's just that it's the wrong temperature, or humidity, or light. And we are like that. We're humans. We do exactly the same thing. We respond to the environment in huge ways. So to understand what's the right greenhouse for us matters in life, at work, and in our personal life as well.
So we've got just a couple more minutes left, but I wanted to ask you probably one of the most important questions, which was, who was the most important mentor in your career, and how has social capital played a role in your career and the businesses that you've led?
It's interesting. I have had several. I can tell you maybe a couple of mentor moments, mentor nuggets that really helped me. But I want to say one thing in general. I valued mentorship a lot less in my youth than I do now. When I was young, I was fairly arrogant and naive, and I didn't appreciate how valuable mentorship was. And I had the amazing opportunities to get incredible mentorship, and I didn't take full advantage of it. If I look back at what do I regret in life, one of my great regrets is that I didn't take advantage of asking people, what do you think? And what would you do in my shoes? And how have you done more? I was just too busy doing my thing. Later in life, that's changed. But I had a mentor, a gentleman called Konrad Rice in Germany, who was an amazing boss. And he thought I was, I had some leadership talent and put me in charge of something. And I was much younger than the people that I was managing. And I had no idea how to do it. I felt a lot of resentment. It's like, who is this guy who's 20 years younger than us telling us what to do? And I called him and I said, Konrad, I'm really struggling. I don't think I can do this. And he said, well, you understand highways, right? Yes. You know that there's one lane highways, 2 lane highways, 6 lane highways, and maybe in Los Angeles, there are 12 lane highways. Fabio, all you have to do with more senior talent is tell them where the destination is and then give them a 12 lane highway to get there. They need to be able to change lanes and go at their own pace. Your job is to make sure that they're not going off the guardrail. They're more or less going in the right direction, but let them figure it out. That was a huge feedback for me and a great lesson, which, to be honest, as a person who has some control-freak tendencies, was very hard to do, but it was essential to surround myself with people that were more talented than me and more capable than me.
I think it's such a big deal because I think I have similar experience where when you're young, you think you can figure it all out on your own. And there are really thoughtful people that have been through these paths before. And it's not that they're telling you what to do. They're just saying they've seen this type of situation in the past. And And a great mentor will listen, they'll challenge you, they'll help build your confidence, but they'll also hold you accountable. And that's really a big deal. And I think for anyone who's going through the crucible of entrepreneurship, you kind of need to start with those hard skills, become a good individual contributor. Then you become a good cultivator of other people's talents and get them to become the best versions of themselves. And then finally, leadership is something a little bit different. That's setting that vision and putting your own signature on how you coordinate all of that together. And successful business owners basically work in many ways through all three of those stages in order to build products and services that people find useful.
Yes.
So,
yes.
Fabio, thank you so much for your time today. I'm really grateful for it. For those that don't know, Fabio serves as a board member at skiesthelimit.org, where we connect underrepresented entrepreneurs with volunteer business professionals for free one-on-one mentoring. Everyone out there does not need to struggle alone. It's so important to find people that you can talk to about your ideas and build your business plan with feedback. So without further ado, we also provide business guides to all our mentors, plus monthly funding opportunities. You can sign up for free today. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe and share.
Thanks for listening to the First Buck Podcast. Don't forget to join the community of underrepresented entrepreneurs and their supporters by signing up at skiesthelimit.org. Click subscribe, and we'll see you next time.